And we're recording to the cloud. Okay, so hello everyone. I wanted to thank you so much for coming out to our workshop this morning, Students on Social Responsibility. And so I am Yinka Akinlade. I am a film production major and a Spanish major, and I'm in the class of 2024, so freshman. My pronouns are she, her, and today I'm going to be hosting this little Q&A session that we have prepared for you. And so we have 3 student panelists, which I am so excited to introduce to you. So first, I will start with Raymond CangKimVo. Their pronouns are they, them, and they are a sophomore math and theology major and a program assistant at LGBT Student Services. CangKimVo founded and co-leads CRIME, which is Caring Radically in Marginalized Environments, and QDPOC, which is Queer Trans People of Color Space, and is president of Transcendence. And they are passionate about mutual aid and centering people of color in conversations at these times. Next, we have Emilee Smith, and her pronouns are she, her, and she's an environmental science major at LMU. She either helps run or is part of Eco Students LMU, Divest, Esper Service Organization, and the app Read that LMU faculty and students have collaborated on. And last but certainly not least, we have Monet Thompson. Their pronouns are they, her, they, she, and they are a screenwriting major with a double major in elementary education. Their involvements in LMU include being a member of the SFTV Student Council, the learning community, which is something that I'm also a part of, and First to Go. All right. So now that we have introduced all of our panelists, we'll start on the Q&A portion of our workshop. And I just wanted to make clear that you feel free to ask any questions that you may have for our panelists in the chat throughout our Zoom meeting. And I just wanted to emphasize that let's keep our questions respectful of our panelists and respectful of their boundaries throughout the Q&A. And so my first question is, in a few words, how would you describe socially responsible daily behavior?
Well, I can start. So I would say socially responsible daily behavior is choosing actions every day that don't cause harm to the community around you. A lot of people think socially responsible daily behavior is choosing like good actions, but sometimes our good actions, even though we think they're good, are actually causing harm to someone around us or someone else who we may not be seeing. So it's a good idea to choose actions every day that don't cause harm to you or anyone around you.
Oh, I'm on. Okay. Not this again. So I would say that socially responsible daily behavior is taking care of yourself and taking care of your community and others. It is important, especially to take care of yourself, especially for people of color and more marginalized folks, because there's a lot of emphasis on activism when you're marginalized, but you shouldn't really be doing that if you're like exhausted every day.
Yeah, and I would say socially responsible daily behavior is basically like practicing what you want to see happening at a large scale, just in your everyday relationships and like friendships. And yeah, that might look like taking responsibility for things you've done, like practicing how to be accountable and how best to support people, even if it's like not about a huge issue. If it's like something tiny, it's important to just basically like build those skills that we're going to need to like make a just world to live in.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much for answering those questions. And I'm actually going to bring back an audience question from our last workshop session. What made each of you interested in the advocacy and service work which you do?
Yeah, I guess I can explain a little bit. I think for me, it was like something that just built up over time. And like when I was younger, I was just angry about things that were happening and knew that it was wrong, but maybe didn't have like the language yet or the knowledge to like just even realize that I could do something about it. And like once I was able to like have some of the language to speak about things and was able to like meet other people who were like-minded, then it just kind of like spiraled into what I'm attempting to do now.
Excuse me. I would say for me, it was like I went to a predominantly Black elementary school. So, like, Black history, it was not just a February thing, it was an all the time thing because we also had predominantly Black teachers. So, in fourth grade, that's the only year I had a white teacher, really. I decided I wanted to be a Black Panther because we watched a movie about like the Black Panthers, and I'm like, they're so cool. Where did they go? And they're from Oakland. I want to be a Black Panther. So just from then on out, it was like educating myself on not just Black history, but like where we're at now, what we're doing now, like reading books and then being angry about everything. I was like fifth grade. I was like 5'1", probably 5 foot, probably 4'11", and I was like ready to like dismantle the whole system. So from then on out, it's just been like constantly learning and constantly seeing like where do people need me. And I'm from the Bay Area, so it's like constantly seeing like gentrification and injustice and racism and classism and just all of that just like constantly happening all of the time. So it's always sort of been like there and I've been aware of it. And now I'm like, okay, well, this sucks. So I want to fix it. So just it's just constantly been learning from then on out.
For me, I came to LMU thinking that all LGBT plus folks are like not racist. That was what my little baby freshman brain thought. And I hung around a lot of white gay folks who would just be really weird and like call me aggressive and or like just frustrate me every single time I hung out with them. And then I was like, something isn't working here. I think every white gay is like this. And was like, I'm just gonna form Cutie Pock Space, which is a closed space for LGBT plus and questioning folks who are people of color, and Crime, which is a queer service group that is led by predominantly queer people of color. And white folks are allowed there, but we don't let them talk as much as they want to. Actually, no, we haven't had any problems. The white folks are very quiet, and I like that. Yeah, but a lot of my work and passions are informed by traumatic instances that I've had with white people, which is like really sad, but also just like has made me very territorial and protective. And as a result, like I've just been very passionate about making sure people have spaces where they can rest. So when they, go back into queer spaces, when they're people of color or just like whatever, when they have to go back into academia in general, because that's a traumatic space, they're able to go somewhere where they can rest and replenish.
Thank you so much for those amazing responses. I think it's a really interesting thing to see how everyone was able to get into advocacy, just so that when you're kind of reflecting on your own life, you're like, okay, well, how am I going to become an advocate, and like what's going to be my thing that inspires me to do that. So thank you so much for sharing, you guys. And so I have another question. This is a bit more timely. Do you think that the meaning of social responsibility and socially responsible daily behavior has changed since the start of the pandemic?
I don't think the definition has changed at all, but I think the pandemic has basically made the need for like socially responsible behavior and mutual aid projects like impossible to ignore. And the like places, or I don't know, I guess just all the like systems that we have that are failing, like the ways that they're failing have just been exacerbated by the pandemic. And so it's just kind of made the like, yeah, just the need for it incredibly obvious. And I think has drawn more people to starting like mutual aid groups and things, which I think is awesome.
Yeah, I would also say that it hasn't really changed. I think like examples of it has expanded. It is, you know, wearing a mask and protecting your community is socially responsible daily behavior. But the definition, you know, is still there. And this is actually something that I've been worrying about a lot. I think like I'm worried that we're going to go back in person and then professors are going to stop being so accommodating. Like now that white folks are also involved in the like disenfranchised group, they've always been marginalized, of course, but like I as a person of color have had to constantly beg my professors when we were in person for accommodations, for extensions on things, and I didn't, and now they're very accommodating, but I'm like, I'm still going to be extremely poor and struggle with paying tuition and struggle with getting my food stamps and struggle with like all of these when we're in person. So why are you not doing X, Y, and Z anymore? Why do you have an attendance policy again? Why, like I think asynchronous classes are amazing and I would like that to somehow stay within and like normalize that. I like don't want to go back to like whatever was considered normal because that was toxic, and obviously Zoom University is extremely toxic still, but yeah, that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's not like the definition truly changed, but people have a higher expectation, especially at the start of the pandemic when it was like all of a sudden everyone was like, oh my God, racism still exists. Like all of a sudden, everyone was very boldly reminded that America has never liked Black people and America still doesn't like Black people. So it's like all of a sudden it was like you have to prove now at the start of the pandemic, everyone was like proving like I'm not racist, I am not homophobic, I'm not transphobic. Like people were just proving so much stuff, and it's like it wasn't necessarily like that helpful in the long term, because a lot of people, they were just like throwing information out there, and that's not really responsible behavior. Like, okay, yeah, pillows are soft and pillows won't hurt anybody, but if you just throw thousands of pillows at someone, I don't think they're really going to appreciate that. And I don't think it's going to help them in the long run. And that's really just what people were doing. So like, even though we're still in a pandemic, it's a really important time to, because you're stuck with like maybe your family, maybe your roommates, maybe your friends, maybe yourself, but it's still a really important time to like see your small community and educate there. And I feel like a lot of people weren't really doing that, which is like, that would have been the responsible daily behavior to be taking, just like educating the groups around you, because I've had to educate my parents very, very much during this pandemic because I'm stuck with them. And I've been like, have you always been like this? So it's like you have to educate the small groups around you. And a lot of people were neglecting that at the start of the pandemic, but I think they're starting to understand that now. And one thing I've noticed a lot is like people have been like, oh, I'm exhausted because I'm like constantly being bombarded with all of this, like, all of this bad news. And I understand it a lot, because for people of color, it's like our lives, like learning about your life and your history as a person of color in America that's just bad news all the time. It's like, can I get an ounce of good news? Please, like, here's one little bit of good news, bucket of bad news. So it's like people were always like, oh, I'm getting exhausted. So it's like we're all sort of having the same experience. And I just want to say it's always okay to take breaks. And it's always okay. You don't have to feel like you need to be on social media reposting infographics all of the time. Please take breaks. I just wanted to stress that.
Thank you so much. And we actually have a couple of questions from our audience in the chat. So firstly, from Emma, do you guys have any tips for healthy conversations with conservative, old school thinking parents, whether that's healthy for you personally or healthy as in the conversation leading in a productive way?
Yeah, I can talk about this a little because, well, especially with my grandparents, I've had some incredibly concerning, necessary, but just conversations that are painful and exhausting, and you like need to take a nap after. But yeah, I think what I've found personally to be the most effective is like someone who has had certain beliefs for like their entire life, you just like saying that you disagree with them, like it's true, and like you can just say what you believe, but I think questioning them, like asking questions, is the most can lead to an actually productive conversation, because if you're like, why did you just say that, why do you believe that, like that's probably the first time they've ever had someone just like question what they're saying. And if they can't answer why, hopefully that is something that would just be going in their mind afterwards and might hopefully cause some kind of a change or self-reflection. But yeah, that's what I would say, asking questions and just like poking holes at their argument through just questioning them.
Well, I would say the biggest mistake my parents ever did was putting already their youngest child, and then they put me in debate. So it was like I already was always like, I know you said I can't eat ice cream, but I ate ice cream, and let's talk about why we can't eat ice cream. I was already like that. So then they taught me how to frame like a structure an argument and structure a belief point. And I really agree with Emilee. Questions are so important because a lot of times when you're talking to an older conservative person, they grew up in a time where like children were not separate entities, children were just reflections of parents, so they absorbed a lot of beliefs, and they might not even know why they have those beliefs. So like asking them a question is, and sometimes they're gonna be like, why are you disrespecting me? No, it's because I said what I said and I stuck by that. But you'd be like, no, but like, why did you say it? And it's never going to be a one conversation thing. My parents and I still have conversations. It's like, I thought we had a breakthrough, but apparently not. So it's like, please don't stress yourself out, because it's going to be stressful every single time. And it's going to be emotionally draining every single time. And it's going to be frustrating every single time. And you're going to keep coming back to it over and over again. And it's one of those things where it's like, it is a marathon, not a sprint. You're going to be working on this for a while. And some parents come around easier than others. And sometimes they don't come around at all. And you cannot fault yourself for that if you tried. As long as you tried, you can't fault yourself for that. So I would just say, like, you can do your best. You can talk to them as much as you want. And sometimes they just don't care.
Yes, thank you so much. I definitely have had those conversations at times, and those for me are super intense, and like having to think about, okay, if this is not going to be productive, maybe I just need to remove myself. But thank you so much for sharing, and especially the asking questions. I think it's very important because, as both Monet and Emilee stressed, like sometimes they don't know why they believe something until someone asks them. And so I think that that's a very important thing to bring into these conversations. So thank you for that question. We have another question from the audience from Vera. Our question is, what resources and activities do you provide or use within the spaces of advocacy that you lead in or are involved with? So whoever would like to go for that first.
Well, this is a shameless plug. I stockpile tons and tons of free resources, books, articles, whatever you name it. In the spaces I work I usually am either working with children. So for that, it's like children's books. I have a ton of those too, by the way, for all children, all sorts of children's books, tons of books. I have them. And I have PDFs for them, and all of it's free. All of it's free. But I love to do word of mouth, especially because I usually am working in either Black or Latinx communities, because I'm in the Bay Area. I'm in Oakland, I'm in Richmond. It's predominantly Black Latinx spaces. So what's usually useful there is like, they don't want to read Race Women in Class by Angela Davis. They lived it. So I just tell them, and we just talk. We just have conversations, because a lot of times, like, telling someone to like read this thick book is like, I don't have time to do that. I have 3 jobs. I have 2 kids. My dog ran away the other day. Like, I don't have time to read this book. So I feel like conversation is the most important thing. And also keeping in mind that it's never your like place as someone outside of a community to come into the community and try to educate them on their own oppression or their own experiences. But books, articles, anything that's accessible and free is something I always try to utilize. It has to be free. It has to be free, because I don't like telling people to go to Barnes and Nobles and spend $23 on a book when I know there's a free PDF out there. It's always something free. So free resources of any sort, something I always use.
For my spaces, I work at LGBTSS, and so these are more like Lalo's things, but I have adopted them when they're not there. We do boundary exercises a lot and community agreements a lot. So for our community agreements, it's just this long PDF of like a bulleted point, like a 50 bulleted point list of different community guidelines. So there are things that are like, don't yuck my yum, which is like, don't go like, ew, when I say I like anchovies on my pizza or something. And there's be mindful of your privileges and identities, honor the sacredness of the space, honor emotional labor from your community, from your facilitators, stuff like that. So when people violate that in conversations, we can refer back to them and be like, hey, remember when it said one Beyonce, one mic? Or something. I don't remember what the community guideline is. Yeah, but we all have agreed upon these community agreements, and that's something that our space has cultivated, which is important because we're all coming from various levels of privileges, and you know, like things are going to be said that are and you know, but like that shouldn't stop us from having these conversations. Boundary exercises, this is more for like personal things, but I really stress in Cutie Puck space that we take care of ourselves and learn more about ourselves and honor our anger and our sadness and our joy. So I make people do this like mind, body, spirit thing where people write down how people are allowed to engage in your mind, body, and with your mind, body, and spirit. And that's just a way for people to be like, okay, I am a cutie puck, and here are the ways that I should take care of myself. I know that I don't like it when white people talk to me in certain ways. I know that I don't like it when people touch my hair, whatever. And those are just like things that you can say to people directly, because now you know this about yourself and you've like written it down. So it's not just like in your head. Yeah, those are 2 things that I use really often.
Yeah, and one like small example of like a resource a group I'm a part of has provided is we just like started a book club in eco students, and like we use the club money to make sure everyone can get a book. You know, it's not like something you're providing for yourself. And it's also been very interesting because there are like more people than I would expect who are like, don't buy me the book. Like they don't want to accept it. And yeah, we've had some people just say, I'll get it on my own. Like you don't need to buy me this book, which I guess is like good if they have the resources and can just get it. But yeah, so we try and like provide that for people so that it's not like a barrier. Money should never be a barrier to participating in anything that we're doing.
Thank you guys so much for sharing. I really appreciate like the ways that you know, use your resources. I think each of you guys brought up very interesting individual points, especially money not being a barrier, because resources sometimes are very expensive. I mean, textbooks are expensive. I know that's just like very random and off topic, but they are. And, you know, that's just like money being a barrier to you educating yourself does not ultimately allow our communities and individuals to grow and learn and become better advocates. So I think that that's really important that you have a focus on just kind of providing resources for free. And also, I think that setting these community boundaries and guidelines, I think, are super important, because that's like a very clear way to like establish just a understanding within a community and establish our boundaries, because boundaries are more important. People didn't really respect boundaries in the past. Now that we're like, respect boundaries, I think that now is the time that we can, you know, use those tools that Ray mentioned like very effectively. So thank you for sharing. And I'm gonna bring back another question from our last session, because I really liked the answers that I got for this. What is one piece of advice you've received or a lesson you've learned pertaining to social justice that is important to you now?
Okay, I can go first. So I would say one of the most like maybe eye-opening and like important lessons is just that no matter what like cause you're fighting for that is related to social justice, they're all connected, and that like intersectionality just allows us to like find the roots of all of these issues. And yeah, just not viewing like certain causes that you're fighting for as isolated from any other like types of oppression and systems of oppression can just make the work that you do like that much more powerful, because it's just like reminding me of like one train of thought, like seeing everything as not connected would lead you to just like only fighting for reform. And when you see everything as connected, then you're trying to get to the root of the issue. And that is really, you can't reform something that's so incredibly broken. Like you can fight to start something new. So yeah.
Yeah, I'm a person who talks a lot, and I remembered my answer from last time. My dad, he always told me like, you don't know everything. You think you're a know-it-all. You don't know everything. And I was like, well, I do think I know everything actually. So, but I've learned that I don't know everything. And I think that's a thing that a lot of people need to work on, because we all sort of grew up assuming that you were in kindergarten or above sometime after 9/11. We all grew up being told like you have to be a leader and learning leadership skills, because that was a very important thing in the American like education framework, not just in public schools, but overall. It was like leadership, 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 leadership. Everyone has to be a leader. So now everyone's trying to lead all of the time, but no one's like listening, and not everyone is a good leader. So it's very important that we know to listen and to learn and to step back from trying to be a leader all of the time, because you're going to go into spaces that you should not be the leader of, and you're going to try to lead, and you shouldn't be doing that, because you're just hurting the people in those spaces by not only devalidating devaluing, I'm gonna stutter, their experiences, and you're just causing more harm, and you're upholding oppressive like structures by doing that. So it's very important that you know when to step back and to learn, because you don't know everything and you're never done learning. You have to constantly keep learning all of the time. You are a lifelong student if you want to be an advocate. You have to be a lifelong student, because you always have to be learning. And sometimes it's not like learning definitions and reading books. Sometimes it's just learning about people, learning their names, learning their experiences, learning like how their intersectional oppression has affected them in their lives. And it's just, that's something you're always going to be learning, something that you cannot always just be like, I want to lead, lead, lead. I want to be in charge. I want to be telling everybody this, that, and the next thing. It's very important to listen.
Yeah, and I definitely think that's important when like white people are just coming into spaces, because, you know, racism has always existed and it's going to continue to exist. And it's very weird if you just come into a space and go and be that overeager white person who's like, what can I do? What can I do? You can sit down and shut up for a few months and just chill and absorb information. I think a lot this summer when like abolition and stuff and topics related to that have been something Black folks have been fighting for a very long time. It was very weird this summer when suddenly a bunch of white people were sharing like Hello Kitty ACAB things and like very bad misinformation on what abolition is, and trying, or I don't know, like when everyone was saying like defunding the police or like or abolishing the police doesn't mean abolishing the police. And like, yes, it is. Stop sharing that. This is misinformation. And I feel extremely bad for all the like people who have been working on this their entire lives. So yeah, it's really good to not, you know, spout information. White folks shouldn't really be. I also think it's important for white folks not to be content creators in talking about racism. It's really weird that people can get social currency about things that they're not a part of. Like, that's really weird. But going back to the question, I think one of the biggest, one of the best advice that I've been getting recently has been to just rest. I have been going through like trauma after trauma the past like 10 days. And this is on top of already being a low income, neurodiverse, Asian trans person. And I keep being asked to like do committee stuff and like work on queer things and all of these things. And really all I want to do is hang out on Zoom with like one person and I don't know, be stupid. And I haven't really been doing that. And it's exhausting to be trans and Asian and all of these things while watching members of my community like be aggressive to me because I'm trans, because we have a lot of work to do in Asian, or in all spaces in general, but in my community of color, very cisgender. And that's not something I can rely on due to white supremacy. But, you know, I do have my set of people that I can find joy in. And yeah, best advice is to rest and make white people send you money.
Thank you so much, you guys, for sharing those things. I think you guys each had a very interesting take on like advice, and I liked how all of them kind of worked together and like formed this little collective whole of just like the 3 key things that you got to keep in mind in your work. I especially think that resting is something that's very important because when you're exhausted, you can't do your best work. And so taking your time for yourself and not allowing those around you to expect you to constantly be providing them with something. In the last session, Ray mentioned about having people who feed you rather than you constantly feeding others. And I think that that was something really important that they brought up, because like constantly giving, then you're left with nothing. And so you just have to understand that sometimes you need to rest, recharge, and establish boundaries. So thank you so much, you all, for sharing. I just wanted to expand on that a little bit. I know that we mentioned slightly a bit about social media and kind of the social currency. And so I have a question. How do you think that students can use their platform, be it social media or platform outside of social media, to practice social advocacy and socially responsible daily behavior?
Yeah, I would say that social media is or can be a great way to like share resources and, you know, like gather donations and do things like that. But I think it's kind of it can just quickly like devolve into performative activism where you're just like shouting into the void and being like, I'm not racist, like I care. And there's just so many ways you can like apply that energy that isn't just like reposting things on Instagram, and not that I'm like trying to condemn it. Like I repost things on my Instagram too, but there has to be some like action behind that. And I think talking with people and like finding a community of people who want to do things and take some action, whether it's like at LMU, like, or I don't know, at a bigger scale. Yeah, I think that's really important. And maybe social media too would be, can be a good way to find people that would be interested in like collaborating with you in that way. So I think it's a helpful resource when you use it right, but it can be tricky and that can happen really quickly.
Yeah, I mean, I love social media because I love attention. And going beyond that, I have made a lot of, or I recently needed to help my friend raise $1,000 for some mental health services, and that was like so stressful for me. I was like, it's not gonna happen. Like, I'm gonna have to be on my story begging white people to send me $5 for like 5 years. But then we raised it within like 5 days. So I'm really grateful for that, because, and it's really weird too, because it was mostly like my cutie pock friends who were like reaching out to me and being like, hey, like I'm reposting this. I just messaged everyone in my family to uh, repost this and share it and donate $5. How is it going? Are there any updates? And stuff like that. And like, I, haven't had that sort of turnout in a while, because normally when I try to do mutual aid, it's through the mutual aid fund for crime. And I feel like that didn't have as much emotional support because it wasn't like a personal mutual aid fund. But yeah, social media advocacy is really great because that's shared so easily, and you have a larger community, at least, of people who are like-minded, because I think hanging out with like-minded people is very valid. But yeah, and then beyond that, you can just find other community orgs outside of LMU or in LMU of people who, you agree, or you not agree with, you are in community with, because, advocacy and activism doesn't just happen in your brain. It's about making community and talking about how you should kill the cop in your head. It's a lot more than just digesting infographics and meeting new people. There also has to be a lot of conversations happening, because that's what's been informing my work. When we were still in person, I was very much radicalized by the other cutie pock I met who were struggling to pay tuition. And then we kept on, figuring things out with whatever Canva infographic we saw that day. Yeah.
I would just say it's very important to start small, because if you spread yourself too thin, the ice will break, you'll fall in the frozen lake. It won't be very fun. You need to have a very thick foundation, a very thick layer. So I would say start small. So like an example would be like, what is your intersectional oppression? So like what is the biggest thing affecting you right now? Like what is the identity that you're going to be oppressed for? Start there. Learn it very well. Learn it very, very well. And then that'll always be your corner. That'll be your corner of something you can advocate very well, something you can talk about very well. Because I feel like a lot of people, they start too big, they cast their net too wide, and then they, not only are you overwhelming yourself, you don't really know or understand what you're talking about. So you have to start small. And then you also have to start with yourself. Learn to decolonize your mindset. I see a lot of people trying to overthrow oppressive structures using oppressive tools. And that's not going to work, unfortunately, because oppressive tools will only rebuild another oppressive structure. So it's very important that you understand the behaviors that you've learned that are negative so you can unlearn those very negative behaviors. And I would say that's pretty much like the key, because a lot of people, if you forget to do that, you can advocate as much as you want, talk as much as you want, get as smart as you want. But until you unlearn negative behaviors, you will always be perpetrating those negative behaviors. And you're not going to do it on purpose, but you're always going to be doing it. And that's something that you really need to like take time. And it's going to take time. I'm still unlearning it. Sometimes I say things and I'm like, that was not like what I should have said. That's very bad. It's like, why do I think that way? Where does it come from? So it's deprogramming all of those negative things that you've learned from school or your parents or your family or your friends. Unlearn all of those things, and it's going to take time. And then start small and cast your net outward, because like I said, you don't want to do harm to other people, because for all of the good that you've done, the harm is what multiplies. The good will be a very small good, but the harm has ripples. So you just need to make sure that you're like fixing the problems you have within yourself before you're trying to fix more and more and more.
Thank you so much. That was an amazing answer. All of you, amazing responses. Thank you for giving your insight. And Monet, your response actually leads in very nicely to another one of my questions that I had for this panel. And so my question to you is, what advice would you give to students who are just starting their journey to practicing advocacy daily? And so I know Monet's answer kind of answers that a bit, but I just wanted to see if any of my other panelists had anything to add.
Sorry, Emilee, I feel like we always unmute at the same time. Okay, re-emphasizing to, if you're just starting out, you need to sit down and shut up and just listen for just a few months. You know, I love the energy, but like, don't use marginalized groups as talking points. I noticed a lot recently that suddenly everyone really cares about Asian folks, and it's really, really exhausting. Or I'm talking specifically, I was watching a Q&A panel for some candidates, and they suddenly were like talking about API things, and I was like, oh, like that definitely was an overnight ad. Like you definitely wouldn't have talked about that pre whatever. This is a issue that I deal with every day. I like this weekend, I think about 33 Vietnamese refugees just got deported back to Vietnam, and I'm Vietnamese, and people within my city, I'm from Garden Grove, were protesting about it, and like that was just such a hard thing to do, and just hearing people like talk about it in a way that's like, I am going to stop AAPI hate, and like not even figure out the fact that like a majority of these hate crimes and all of these terrible things are rooted in the fact that we are anti-sex worker, and we are misogynistic, and we are transphobic, and we are classist, and like all of these things, and like the fact that like America's anti-communist propaganda and hate for China has fueled a lot of this. Like you don't even know that, and you're saying all of these things and giving such surface level like anti-racist practice. Just send me $20 and like we'll like call it a day. Like you're not solving anything by like having these conversations and making me watch you talk, or like even giving me a platform to talk. My white professor just like was like, hey, like let me hold space for everyone, and then me and my other Asian friend, we're both queer by the way, just cried in front of a classroom of like 14 people, 10 of whom including the professor were white. Like you don't do that. Please be very conscious of the way that you talk about these issues. We're not talking points, we're actual people, these are actual communities. And I would also say to like allies or accomplices or whatever, have a be the person that steps in and goes, hey, let's stop this conversation, instead of making the person of color wait to be like to hold a boundary. And this is something that you might have to be a little careful with, just because, you know, you can't speak for every person of color. I personally don't like educating white folks. I think they can just Google things, and I don't have the capacity for it. A lot of other people of color are a lot more patient. But yeah, I like, sometimes I'll be in class and I'll be like texting my white friend and be like, Jesus Christ, this professor just said this. And they would be like, yeah, that really sucks. And I'm like, this is the part where you tell the professor to shut up. And I'm like, I thought this was established. Like, what else is the point of having white friends if they're not going to do that for you? Yeah, those are my hot take tips. That's a stupid phrase. I take that back. Those are my tips.
Yeah, I would say if you're just starting out, kind of to echo like what Monet was talking about, I think it's really important to start with yourself and like being very critical about the things you believe, or maybe what your like knee-jerk reaction to certain things is, and like really question that, and just figure out why you believe that. Because I think like the term like compulsory heterosexuality that idea can be applied to so many things. Like it's kind of just ingrained in us to like have a lot of these compulsory reactions and beliefs because of just like what has been taught to us, like explicitly or not, just by like living in the society that we do live in. So I think starting with just questioning yourself, and also with my life personally, like talking about, it's kind of worked out. I think some of my close friends, like we've been, you know, questioning ourselves and thinking the same things, kind of going through that at the same time, and just like telling other people like what you're thinking about can be really helpful. Obviously, you shouldn't be like burdening anyone when you're like trying to figure everything out, but it is kind of like a transformation, maybe like when you're starting to try and be like a true advocate for social change. So definitely having conversations about it can be really beneficial.
And I just want to add that, just a short thing, it's very important. Don't hold dinner parties, don't throw dinner parties, don't entertain dinner parties. And I don't mean like don't have dinner with your friends and have fun. I mean, don't have conversations and don't hold spaces to talk about issues that affect marginalized people without marginalized people in that space leading that conversation. Don't let those conversations start. Don't like open those conversations up, and don't go to those conversations, because they happen a lot. And I find that if you are one of those marginalized people, they are very damaging to your mental health. They are very exhausting, because people are going to be looking at you the entire dinner party like, what are you going to say now? Please tell us. We all want to feed from your experience. And you're like, but I'm not gaining anything from this. This wasn't a community space that I thought we would hold. So just be very wary of dinner parties, because when you're starting out trying to like start advocating and trying to get into social justice, you're going to run into dinner parties a lot. They're everywhere out there, and people hold them for brownie points. People hold them to make themselves feel better about not being oppressed. And yeah, just don't go to dinner parties, guys. Avoid dinner parties.
Thank you so much, you guys, for your responses. I think those are all really important things to keep in mind, because I feel like this past year, you know, a lot of people are just now beginning their social advocacy journey and feel like they don't know where to start, that they're drinking from like a fire hose and that there's so much coming at them all at once. And so I think that you all really took a nice approach to breaking it down into some key things that people can focus on and take away from this workshop. So I thank you all for that. And now we have about only a few minutes left in our workshop. And so I have one final question just to kind of bring it back to us being students at LMU. How do you think that the students in this workshop can bring social responsibility and advocacy to whatever clubs, student orgs, and whatever spaces that they're a part of on campus.
You go ahead. No, go.
Okay. So I was just going to say that I think the way that your club or organization is like set up structurally and like organized is like a really important thing to think about, and may not be something that initially you are like thinking about. I'm not sure, but yeah, I think it's just really important to not mimic. Yeah, kind of. Also, I think Monet touched on this a little bit earlier, but not like just recreating oppressive structures, even on such a small scale as like a club on campus. Like if having a certain hierarchy is not working in the large scale, then why wouldn't we use this opportunity of like having a club on campus with your friends to like try and collaborate and work together in a different way? And yeah, I just think it's really an opportunity to like try and work things out in a different way that we don't see at a larger scale.
Yeah, I was just going to like reiterate that it's very important to start small, but it's also very important to call it out when you see it. Because a lot of times if you just bring it up randomly, you're going to accidentally throw a dinner party. Even if you don't have any food there, you're going to accidentally throw a dinner party. So it's very important to call it out when you see it happening, while you see it happening. And I always like want to stress, if that would create an unsafe situation for you, don't call it out. Maybe you text that person later and be like, hey, what you said today, what you did today wasn't okay. And if they're like, why? You're like, here's why. If they don't ask why, still tell them why. It's like, this was harmful to me. This was harmful to other people. This was like perpetrating this, that, the next thing. So it's just very important that you call it out when you see it happening in a way that will not harm you. But I also want to stress that very quickly will lead to like an argument, or it might lead to an argument, or they might just accept it and be like, hey, I get it. But a lot of times it's going to lead to an argument. So I would say either like make sure you always sort of like know what you want to advocate for. Make sure you always like know what you want to say, because you don't want to get trapped like not knowing what you're saying, then you realize you don't know what you're talking about, because you're trying your best. You are trying your best, but that's not going to be a very helpful way to be an advocate if you don't know what you want to say, I guess. So it's very important that you make sure arm yourself. Your knowledge is your protection. That's your protection from getting like, that's your protection from people not taking you seriously. That's your protection from people trying to diminish you, because if you're trying, but they might not just care. They might just not care. Ooh, they might. Okay, you know what? Skip that sentence. We all know what I'm trying to say. So it's just very important that you know what you are trying to advocate for, and that you call it out when you see it. And you always have to be ready to get into arguments. Always don't schedule a time in your day for it, but leave yourself a little leeway, a little free time to know that sometimes people are going to say things that's not okay. And you can just throw a Google link at them or throw a Quizlet at them. But if this is important, like let's say it's like your brother and your brother accidentally fell down the alt-right pipeline, it's important to sit your brother down, talk to him and be like, this is not okay. This is why it's not okay. This is not going to help you. It's not going to help anybody else. And sometimes it's always important to know, sometimes people genuinely won't care. And that is not a reflection of you. And it's not a reflection of how hard you tried. It's very important. Take care of yourself. Don't let yourself feel bad because you didn't know something or because someone didn't listen to what you were saying. So just like always rest and take care of yourself and know that you are trying, because you're not going to know everything. You're going to mess up sometimes, but know that you are trying. And as long as you're not causing harm to other people, just know that you still did your best and you can still have confidence in yourself and trust yourself. And you know what, you'll get up and do something else tomorrow. And that's just very important.
Oh my God. Monet and I were DMing in the Zoom chat, and I was like, go before me. But now I'm like, I don't know what to say after Monet talks. Okay, I'm gonna give a little anecdote about my personal experiences at LMU. I don't really hang out in API RSOs because I'm trans, and I've had a lot of weird transphobic experiences where I would be like, my pronouns are he, him. And then one time an eBoard member laughed at me when I said that. And I've had a lot of instances like that. So yeah, like it's really hard to be at different intersections and then try to find your community. I would say to these orgs, like, you need to acknowledge your histories. Asian and Black communities have a historic tension, and that is the fault of white supremacy. The transphobia that is ingrained in communities of color are the fault of white supremacy, which means we need to actively unlearn it. And, this means for the more marginalized folks, have boundaries. If you want to bring something up, you can tell your friend to do it, like your cis ally friend to text them on your behalf. Or if you want to say it yourself, you can be like, hey, Monet, I was really uncomfortable when you said X, Y, and Z, and I don't really want to talk about it until next week with you. You can say, like, and you can also be like, don't send me apologies. I don't want to hear it. It's what you need at that time, because you need to take care of yourself as well. For more privileged folks in marginalized spaces, I would say to make sure that the more marginalized folks in your community are in a good space in the best way they can. So this is making sure that they are currently fed, making sure that they don't have any needs that you can meet. So, like, I don't know, being like, hey, how's your bank account right now? Oh, you have $40 in your bank account? Let me get some people to send you some money. And doing that work for them is really important, because as much as, like, this is about unpacking systemic issues, this is also about making sure that the people in your community are being fed, as Minka mentioned earlier. Yeah.
All right, thank you so much. Those responses were amazing and a really great way to close off our session here today. I just wanted to thank all of you again for coming out. It really means a lot to me. I also want to thank my amazing panelists. I was really almost for a second on the verge of tears. I was so happy that they were able to come out and share their experiences with us and just be amazing, because they just are amazing. So I thank you so much for our panelists, and thank you for listening. And I hope that you guys were able to take something away from this workshop. And so right now there is a quick 15-minute break until 12:30, and where we'll have our keynote speaker speaking in, if you go to the Advocacy Teach-In website, our keynote speaker will be speaking at 12:30. So please make sure to go and check that out. And I hope you all have a great rest of your day. Thank you again for coming, and thank you again to my amazing panelists. Yeah, enjoy the rest of your weekend. Bye.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much.